Okay, class is about to start. I'm Dr. Denboer. We're going to be doing an introduction. Dr. Kate's going to follow through and give us some awesome information on nature's first aid and useful information, news to use, so to speak. We get so many calls starting after Halloween because of all the sweets through the first 2 weeks of January. And it's a little bit like an avalanche overcomes us with emails and phone calls and Johnny's having this and that. And then we always ask, well, do you have this and this available? And then we can give directions. So this is going to be truly news to use. I wanted to introduce first with just a touch of history. When I started here 27 years ago, I just would say, well, use echinacea and this vitamin C and right your very basics, because you always have to start with basics. And my patients were not responding. And I go, okay, well, must be that these Americans just have such a poor lifestyle, they don't respond like they do in Europe. So I went on that formula, that theory for a little while. And then, maybe not. So what I did at that point is I thought, you know, the FDA here is quite a bit different than what I'm used to in Europe. It seems like their only function is to prevent death from nutrients. And that's about it. So I decided to just test a vitamin C that I bought at a local health food store here. It's very easy to test. Ascorbic acid is a very simple test. And it came back at 10% of what was on the label, along with other things that weren't on the label. And that was the very beginning in our quest for quality control. We've done many, many tests since then, and have also done some reading, obviously, independent analysis. And I'd like to give you echinacea as an example. Echinacea is a very common remedy. Dr. Kate's going to talk about it. But how it's harvested and manufactured and ultimately given matters a lot. Echinacea, when you buy it in Europe, it means that one, it's organic. In fact, it's not even on the label. They don't even put organic on the label. It's just assumed because that's the law. All these herbs must be organic. Then the second thing, according to German Commission E-rules, which most European countries abide by, is you have to harvest it when the flowers are flowering. So that's a very particular time. Apparently it's about a 36-hour window where it's at its peak. Then the law states you will take the plant and process it within 24 hours. Another very important but often neglected little thing. And not only that, you are only supposed to take the active parts of the plant. Don't just grind the whole thing, root, stock and all. No, take the active components and you titrate that with a specific concentration of alcohol, which then allows us to pull the nutrients in a specific ratio out into the liquid. And if you're going to make a tablet out of it, you have to decoct it, which means you slowly heat it up into a slurry and then let it dry, and that maintains its activity. Here I see it in gummy bears and in all kinds of weird tinctures, and the stuff doesn't work. You don't even know what you're buying. So it's really important that if you're buying something, that it be active, that it actually works, has clinical trials behind it, we know its side effects, and that is absolutely critical. As you could probably tell, I'm quite passionate about this because here are people taking their hard-earned money thinking they're doing the right thing, and they're not. I just recently saw a study on St. John's wort. This is slightly off topic, you know me. St. John's wort, and how does it work for depression or not? It was done by Johns Hopkins Medical School, and they said, no, it's totally useless. I'm going, what? There's over 60 studies showing how well it proves, and they're well done studies. So I dug into it. Wrong part of the plant, no trace of how it was processed, and wrong dose and wrong amount of time. Study was designed to fail. Basically designed to fail. So here you are, confronted with all this confusing stuff. So help us let you sort through that. Ask us questions. What about this? What about that? and we'd be happy to help you sort through it, because we spend our time digging through all that research, what's right, what's not, what's quality, what's not, and it's been quite a journey for us to be able to provide you with that. So with that, I'd like to turn the mic over to Dr. Kate, and this should be a really fascinating one.
Welcome everybody. Feels like it's midnight out, so I appreciate you guys are all here at this late night seminar. That's what it feels like. We're going to be talking a lot about the cold and flu season that we are just entering now. Specifically, we would like to address things that you can have at home, or things that you can do at home with things that you might have around to prevent the full-blown cold and flu. Okay, so there are loads and loads of different things that we can do to modulate the immune system. Loads. I'm not going to cover even a small fraction of them here. We have so many things that we can do, but I'm going to pick out a couple really useful, really helpful, really specific things to the more immediate care of colds and flus, as opposed to, say, chronic infections tonight. So that's sort of what we're going to cover. Part of the reason that we are choosing this topic is because I was having a conversation with my parents, and they were talking about us growing up as kids and some of the different things that happened. We were reminiscing, and they were talking about doctor's visits. And my mom said something really interesting. She said that kids don't get sick during normal business hours. They choose holidays and weekends to get sick. It's the Friday night, in the middle of the night, early Saturday morning. That's when your child is going to get sick. And so I thought that was really interesting. And she talked a lot about the struggle that it was to get us in to see the doctor, and what do you do, asking a lot of questions, not sure who to talk to on those odd hours. And so I thought, and we thought, that it would be a good idea to sort of give people some tools, some things that they can have at home, so that when that happens, if you or your child or your loved one gets sick, that you have resources right away. Because that's pretty critical. Dr. Denver will tell you, you don't have to get sick. You might start to come down with something, right? But you don't have to let it go into a full-blown illness. It doesn't have to happen. So anything that we can do to prevent that, give you the education that you need for that, is what we'd like to do tonight. The other reason that we want to talk about the immune system specific to cold and flu is that when you do go to your conventional doctor, they don't have a lot of great options for these kind of things, particularly for viruses. I remember going in as a kid, and they would test and see if I had strep throat, and when it came back negative, they'd say, well, just wait it out, drink a lot of fluids, you know, kind of do that whole thing. Or they would try to throw an antibiotic at us, even if it was a virus, right? We know now, didn't necessarily back when I was a child, but we know now that doesn't really help a lot, and it actually can contribute to some problems. So we're going to discuss some of those things as well. I want to make sure that you have those tools. So let's talk through the immune system. That's where we're going to start. We're going to do a little bit of a study on what is the immune system, who is involved, and once we can understand those systems, that informs us into what we can change and what we can affect. That's what we look at in functional medicine. It's a systems medicine. It's not symptom management. So let's talk through some things about the immune system first, and then we will delve into some prevention, some preventative measures that we can take, and then also some treatment measures that we can take in a bunch of different categories. So some of the key players in the immune system, most people think right away of white blood cells, lymphocytes being a typical category. I have a little figure here showing some different types of white blood cells. We've got two categories. We have innate immunity and adaptive immunity. The terms sort of imply the difference between the two of those. Innate being, it's always there, okay? It's always within us. Adaptive, right, the term to adapt, to change to your circumstances. So we've got innate immunity. We're going to talk a lot about this guy here, natural killer or NK cells. These are one of the first responders, okay, along with macrophages, neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils. If you ever get blood work done, you can see some of those items are listed on your blood work. Percentages and amount of these white blood cells are going to be on there. Those are innate immunity. The adaptive immunity has more to do with becoming immune to something. If you think about, you've heard of people having say the chicken pox, right? You get the chicken pox, and then the idea is that your body builds immunity to the chicken pox, so you usually don't get that again, right? That's the adaptive immunity. That's their job. So they're slower responders. For the purposes of this discussion, we're going to talk much more about those quick responders, because those are the ones that we want kicked in right away. We care a lot about how well the natural killer cells are working at the beginning, because that's what's going to keep us from going full-blown cold or flu. Does that make sense? Yeah. Other systems are involved in our immunity hugely. Can anybody name a system besides white blood cells that have to do with our immune system?
The microbiome.
The microbiome, for sure. The bacteria that live on and in our bodies. We're definitely going to talk about making sure that those guys are healthy and which strains are most appropriate as far as for the immune system goes. What about like a body system, an actual human body system? Sorry? I heard one. Your gut, absolutely, right? Loads of our immune system, it happens in our gut. It's huge. We're just starting to understand the lymph tissue that lives in our gut and how big of an impact it has on our overall immunity. Good, very good. Other ones? Anybody? What about the skin, right? The skin is huge too, right? It's a physical barrier. It determines what's outside our body and what's inside our body, right? So it protects us, that protective barrier. Now, skin is sort of permeable, right? Things can go through it, things can live on it. So we have to be cognizant of how well our skin is intact. You've heard about people who have burns, right? How much that can affect their immune system, how it can make them very predisposed to getting really severe infections, because that skin is a very primary innate immune organ. Mucous membranes, right? So some of the secretions in our nasal passages, in our lungs. Our tears is another one. You don't think about that, but there's antimicrobial properties to tears to protect our eyes. So there's a lot of different systems involved in the immune system besides white blood cells that we can take care of and that can be used as preventative measures for our immunity. So let's say we are faced with an infection. Let's say our body is infected with a bacteria or a virus. We have an immune response that happens following that. One part of immune responses sometimes have to do with fevers. That's a really classic sign that you have an infection, is that you get a fever, your body temperature rises. Sometimes fluctuating a little bit, but that's a very common thing to measure to see, hey, do we have an infection going on? Does anybody have any ideas of why our body might raise in temperature or why we might get a fever if we have an infection? There's a reason, and it's a good one. Yeah?
It's one way that our body fights off an invader.
Absolutely. So most invaders, viruses or bacteria, are made up of proteins. And those proteins are fragile sometimes to heat. So if you raise body temperature enough, then those proteins do something called denaturing. It's what happens when you fry an egg, right? The white stuff or the clear stuff turns white. It changes that protein and it makes it inactive. That would be the idea. So sometimes we want to have a fever, right? It's part of our normal innate immune system. Now, our immune system can go overboard, right? We know that. And so making sure that the fevers that our body have are regulated properly is another way that we often will help fight the symptoms of an infection. But a fever is not necessarily a bad thing. There is a reason our body does it. The same thing with inflammation. Sometimes we get the idea that inflammation is always bad. We're always talking about anti-inflammatory this and that. But inflammation serves a really important purpose. We can't heal without inflammation. We can't fight off microbes without inflammation. We just need to make sure that it's regulated. It's within a window, a safe window for our bodies. So we're thinking with inflammation, soreness, muscle soreness, or fatigue, right? That sort of run down feeling that you get when you're coming down with a cold or a flu. That's inflammation happening in our body, and it's a sign that our body's fighting things off. I put expulsion on here. Anybody who has had an intestinal flu knows what I'm talking about when I'm talking about expulsion, okay? Really, really important, actually, for our bodies to get rid of any invaders, okay? Same thing with having a runny nose or watery eyes. Your body is trying to expel the invader. And if that's not working properly, if you can't eliminate well, you're going to have all sorts of problems with chronic infections, and you're going to have problems fighting off those infections. So a lot of different components to the immune system that we don't often think about. But the nice thing that I always tell patients is the more things that we have that are involved in an issue, the more windows to treatment we have, right? So instead of thinking about, oh, there's so many things wrong with me, let's think about all the different ways that we can plug in to our body systems that we can fix the issues, right? If we actually look at them globally that way. Anybody have questions right now about what we talked about the immune system? Okay, let's move forward. So when we're talking about the functional medicine approach, which I kind of hinted at, we're looking more towards wellness care, okay? Immune wellness, so taking care of all the components of our immune system. We're not looking to cure sickness, right? Sure, everybody comes down with things once in a while. We do need to treat these things. But with functional medicine, we want to work harder at making sure you never get there. And so we're going to discuss some things that are preventative. We're going to discuss a lot of things we can do right away at the onset of an illness. Another reason that we want to focus functional medicine is preventing antibiotic resistance. Big problem. A study, decently recent study, showed that about 80% of prescribed antibiotics do not meet the guidelines for a necessary prescription, according to the CDC. 80%. Now, there has been a big push to reduce antibiotics use. Even in conventional medicine, you will see a lot of pediatricians are holding off on prescribing antibiotics, which is awesome. It's a little late, unfortunately, because antibiotic resistance is a big problem globally, even more so than it is in the US. But we want to avoid needing to use those things, and we want to use things that don't involve killing off all of our healthy bacteria as well as the unhealthy bacteria that live in our body. That includes things like that little squirty antimicrobial stuff you put on your hands and antimicrobial beads in your soap and that kind of stuff. We're trying to move away from using those things to prevent antibiotic resistance, because really just washing your hands with soap and water is just as effective as any of those things, especially if you're in a healthy household. So whenever we talk about functional medicine, we always talk about nutrition. Food is the best medicine. It's the strongest medicine that we have. And everybody's got to eat. So we might as well use our food as medicine as well as nutrition. Particularly if you feel that you're coming down with a cold, or if you feel your immune system has been compromised in some way, the first step is to avoid processed foods and sugar. So recent study stated that 2 cans of soda, or the equivalent in sugar, which actually is much if you think about the standard American diet, can reduce your immune capacity or your immune cells' activity by 40% in 10 minutes. That's how fast it works and how much it works to reduce our ability to fight off infection. So imagine if you're consuming that daily, how much harder it is for you to be able to fight off colds and flus or any sort of immune problem. So you want to avoid those things for sure. Bacteria and viruses and fungi, they love to eat sugar. It's really easy for them to digest and to use as energy. So we want to avoid eating those things. We want to eat the rainbow. That's something the health coaches often talk about, is eating variety of colors of food. The reason we do that is because the variety of colors also means variety of essential micronutrients. Okay, so all of those good things, the actual nutrition part of food that we need for our immune system's cofactors and all the chemical processes that have to do with inflammation, all of that is in the color. So dark berries, dark leafy greens, yellows, oranges, okay, all of the different colors, purples, right? As much as we can, eating different colors, that's going to help boost our immunity through food. Stay away from the bland. Stay away from the tans and the whites and the grays, right? All of those foods that are much more processed, much more carbohydrate laden. We want colorful foods. And then balancing blood sugar. That applies to pretty much everything in our body. If we balance our blood sugar, we will be healthier, okay? For immune system, it's the same thing. Really, really important to eat balanced diet and to also eat frequently enough that your body has the fuel that it needs to fight off infection. So let's talk more about some common sense prevention. Yes?
With the sugar, all sugar, like even like honey, maple syrup.
I mean, really minimize that as much as possible. Yeah, yep, absolutely. Hand washing, okay? This is not using antimicrobial soaps. This is not, I mean, this is basic stuff. Regular old soap, okay? The idea is we want to minimize the bad without scraping off or killing all of the good bacteria that's on our skin, okay? So it's disrupting but not killing is the idea. And just getting off some of the excess. I think about how much our hands touch, right? We don't necessarily need to disinfect, but we definitely want to reduce the load that we are experiencing on our skin. That's the same thing for avoiding touching our face, right? Anytime we touch our face, we take whatever's on our hand and we transfer it closer to nasal mucosa, mouth, throat, ears, eyes. You want to stay away from doing a lot of that. It's one of the best things you can teach your kids is to try not to touch their face quite so much, okay? Same thing with if you're gonna sneeze, don't sneeze like this, sneeze like this, right? Sneeze into your elbow. Better than to not spread things around, even onto your own person, right? Sleep is huge. Tons of studies show that even one night's sleep deprivation can reduce immunity. So we wanna make sure that if your body's telling you to sleep, that you allow it to sleep. Preventatively, make sure that you're getting enough sleep. Most of us feel like we don't, especially this time of year, right? And I think that has a lot to do with why the incidence of cold and flu does increase, is because our lives get a lot busier starting in September. Whether we're in the school system or not seems to be busier for no apparent reason. So making sure that you're getting enough sleep, very preventative for immune system. Vitamin D as it's dark outside. A lot of us are going to end up going to work in the dark and coming home from work in the dark. Here in Michigan, at least, really impossible to get enough vitamin D without supplementation in the wintertime. The sun just is not out enough. Again, strong correlation between this time of year and colds and flus. Definitely has to do with vitamin D, that sort of omnipresent vitamin D that's in every cell in our body, can be used for pretty much any function that it needs to be used for, and is almost globally deficient. Even if you've managed to crawl up past that, whatever it is, 25, I think, is the minimum that your doctor's going to tell you, not nearly enough. Okay, we need to really push the vitamin D, particularly in the wintertime, as a preventative measure for immunity. Hydration, that has to do with elimination. Right? We talked about needing to get out, right? Get things out of our system, whether that's sweating it out or urinating it out, right? Our body needs to filter out the bacterial, I guess, debris is a good way to put it, or viral debris that runs through our body when we're sick. So the more we can push hydration, the more we get of elimination, which helps us to recover a lot faster. And then also, don't underestimate chiropractic adjustments. It's something, unfortunately, we kind of don't talk a lot about in our seminars, but particular to the immune system, there's been some really interesting studies done showing huge benefits to chiropractic adjustments, not only prevention, but also as a treatment. So one study took blood samples from patients before an adjustment and after an adjustment, 15 minutes before, 15 minutes after, as well as patients who received a sham adjustment. So they didn't actually get adjusted, but they were given a treatment that seemed like an adjustment, okay? So you have these two groups of people, two different phases. They were measuring natural killer cell activity, so how active these cells were. And they actually showed significant difference, significant increase in activity between the pre and the post, as well as between the post and the sham. Okay, so not only was it higher than the sham, but it was higher than the pre. So significant increase with adjustments of natural killer cell activity. That's good, clean science. So really, really important. If you feel like you're coming down with something, come in, get adjusted. Get adjusted every month, every 6 weeks. If you feel like your immunity is compromised, that's a huge part of staying well as well, per our functional medicine prevention of immune system issues. So let's say all of this happens, you're doing really great, you're preventing, and you still feel like you're coming down with something, right? We're human, this happens. What do we do? So there's a couple different things that we can work with. We've got a bunch of different categories. I'm going to talk to you about probiotics. I'm going to talk to you about micronutrients. We're going to talk about some herbs. We're going to talk about homeopathics. And we're also going to talk about home remedies and folk medicine. So buckle up. I'm going to try to do this in as fast and as efficient way as possible and cover as much as we can. And then we'll take questions on all of these at the end. Know that there are loads of other things that you might be familiar with that we can talk about at the end that are useful for more specific issues. But we're going to try to run through these really fast. So two different probiotics I want to highlight. One is Ultraflora Acute Care. We tend to use this for intestinal issues. Okay, very, very good at reducing diarrheas. Okay, so if you've got the intestinal flu, Ultraflora Acute Care includes something called Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a beneficial fungus or yeast, and that's very, very helpful for dealing with a lot of candida overgrowth that comes with that. So not only preventative, but also very treatment-oriented for intestinal flus or traveler's diarrhea, that kind of stuff. So a first line of defense for sure. Same thing with Ultraflora Immune Booster. This is a new guy that colonizes, the types of bacteria colonize the nasal passages in the respiratory tract. So probiotics are not just about the gut anymore, folks. We are exploring that world fully, and I'm sure that within 50 years, maybe less, most of our treatment forms are going to have specific bacteria that we know treat that specific issue. And we're going to have loads more probiotics that we can use and much more specific and helpful. So these are two that we work with at the very beginning to make sure that we balance out that bacteria very quickly in the process of the cold and the flu. As far as micronutrients go, everybody knows about vitamin C. However, with traditional vitamin C, that ascorbic acid that Dr. Denber was mentioning earlier, oftentimes you will see a dip in immunity at the very beginning of starting to take the vitamin C before your immune system starts to pick up, okay? With the augmented version that's in ultra potent C or super C chewable, you don't have that dip. It starts going up right away, okay? Within 4 hours, I think is what it is. So it starts increasing your cell activity sooner without giving you sort of a vulnerable period like regular vitamin C from the store would give you. So it's a little bit different. It's also much more bioavailable. Vitamin C is huge for the immune system. That is why everyone knows about it. When you say, what do you take for your immune system? Everyone says vitamin C, and there's a good reason behind that. It's very, very critical. Zinc is another one. We test zinc in every new patient that comes into this office. And I would say 10 to 1, maybe, we have somebody who can actually taste the zinc, who actually has some excess stored up zinc in their body. I don't know, would you say even that much? No. It's pretty rare that we find somebody with adequate zinc. And that's huge it's a cofactor for a lot of the chemical processes in our body that allows our immune system to do what it's supposed to do. So zinc's pretty important as well. Easy, easy, easy to get. We have liquid and we have a tablet form, I believe. A lot of different things that we can do with zinc. Vitamin A is another good one. We use Viracid to get high dose vitamin A. I think it's 15,000 international units, pretty high. And we use that for a short period of time. It's not something that you would take long term typically unless you have chronic infection issues. But Viracid, again, the name implies it does a good job with getting rid of viruses. So that's one that a lot of people will use too for the vitamin A. So that's micronutrients and probiotics. Let's talk about first responders, okay? We've got 3 that I want to talk about. The first one is called Essential Defense. Essential Defense is an ancient Chinese formula. Okay, so it's ancient Chinese herbs that are blended together, and they're taken right away within the first 24 hours that you feel like you're coming down with something. Sometimes we'll even have patients take as much as 1 per hour or 2 per hour at the onset of symptoms, whether you start feeling like run down or you start feeling a cold or congestion coming on. The Chinese herbs work really nicely within those first 24 hours. When I was in college, I had the privilege of going to China to study traditional Chinese medicine, and I appreciate Essential Defense because in China, what you would do is you would be given a bundle of herbs, and you would have to go home, and you'd have to put it in hot water and boil it, and it would emit horrifying smells as that happened, and then you would have to drink it. And it would be, I can't even describe it to you, but it just really, really awful. So to take something so potent and put it into a tablet form that we can take without having to do all of that homework is a wonderful thing, and it works beautifully. Mycopharin is next on the list. My friends refer to this as magic mushroom juice. I have patients who call it little patients, kids, who call it spicy medicine. So that's what they'll ask their parents for. It's an extract of 7 different types of mushrooms. Here you can see one of them, the beautiful reishi mushroom. And each of these mushrooms has medicinal properties. Now the beauty of mycopharin is it's liquid, so it's easy to dose for children up into adults. And it's also food, so it's very safe. Unless you have a mushroom allergy, you're not going to react poorly to it, unlike with some herbs, right? So we know foods tend to be very safe for children, breastfeeding mothers, all through anybody. So that's why we like mycopharin. It works beautifully as well. Early on, usually run through a vial of it and you're good to go. Dr. Denbour already mentioned echinacea. Echinacea can kill on contact. That's what we kind of think about, or how I think about echinacea. So it's really important for me to have a liquid version of this, which is what Dr. Denbour was talking about. Properly made echinacea can kill strep infections. So it can actually kill colonies on the back of the throat. So a lot of times we'll have patients gargle with it because it works beautifully for sore throats. It's very soothing, yes, for a sore throat. And I usually have people put a couple drops into a little bit of water so you can gargle with it. But echinacea has a million different uses. We can talk about, or we'll talk about one that I like to use it for later, but a lot of times we think sore throats. If I had to pick one of these 3 to have at home, I would choose echinacea because it has a million different things that you can use it for, and it really works nicely. You can put it in your tea, you can use it as a poultice. There's a lot of things that you can do with echinacea. And there's the lovely coneflower. It's even pretty. Homeopathics. This is a mysterious one for a lot of us. Homeopathics are much more common in Europe, although they're becoming more common here. The idea behind homeopathics has to do with serial dilutions. So taking a substance and diluting it in water, shaking it up, they call it potentization. And then what happens is the water molecules take what they call an imprint of that molecule, whatever you mixed with it. Even though you dilute it and dilute it and dilute it and dilute it and dilute it, it changes the structure of that water molecule so that it takes on characteristics of that whatever plant, mineral, whatever it is you put in there, without actually having active ingredient anymore in that. Interesting thing about homeopathic medicine is that the more you dilute something, the stronger it is. So very, very safe. One of the reasons we love it is because anybody can take it. There is no active ingredient in it. So babies, breastfeeding mothers, very, very safe. You're going to know if it's going to work really quickly because it dissolves under your tongue. So it's not something you have to digest and incorporate into your body. It's going to work fast. And there you can put it in a liquid form, or you can put it in a dissolvable tablet form, or you can put it in just about any form, and it's very effective that way. So a lot of the things that we use, particularly for children, are based on homeopathics. So a couple ones I wanted to highlight. OSC, or oscillococcinum, is one that we use for your standard flu. So malaise, muscle soreness, fever, that kind of stuff is what we use OSC for. Very efficient right at the beginning. Very helpful for, we use kind of like a, I don't know, I always compare it to a Z-Pack because it's something you take 3 a day of for like 4 days, and then it's not something you would necessarily keep taking. It's much more for acute care. Pulsatilla. When I think of pulsatilla, I think of ear infections. Okay, a lot of times ear infections, sinus infections, cold and flu, they kind of run through a cycle. You turn from one to the other. So pulsatilla is really, really nice for that. Belladonna is wonderful for fevers, especially in children. It's a go-to, I know, for Dr. Denbour right away. If a child is spiking a fever, we give them belladonna to take it down. Arnica for some of the pain and muscle soreness associated with the cold and flus. Bruising as well, if you notice that. Alpha CF is a blend of different homeopathics that works nicely for lots of different symptoms of the cold and flu. So if you don't have something really specific you're going after, a lot of times we'll use Alpha CF. It's a tablet and a liquid form, which we like as well. I like homeopathics. Before I started working at DBC, I didn't do a lot with homeopathics, but I have found them to be very, very effective. And a nice thing in my back pocket because of the safety factor. It's not going to interact with other medications. I really like that. I feel really confident in recommending these to my patients for that reason. And nice to have for your own self-use because you don't have to worry quite so much about, am I overdosing? Should I be taking this? Am I underdosing? Let's talk about folk medicine a little, something we don't get into a whole lot here at DBC because we're so research-based. When we use the term folk medicine, a lot of times we're referring to things that have good, I guess, qualitative information behind them. So a lot of firsthand, people say this works really nicely for me, but not a whole lot of solid data as far as research studies behind them. A lot of times these things are hard to study. They're hard to isolate from a bunch of other things. So we'll use them as folk medicine, appreciate their effectiveness that way. Oils is a big one. I have a lot of patients who use essential oils, a lot of patients who talk to me about essential oils. I don't research essential oils because I have too much scientific research over here with these other things that we're using. But I know that quality is a big issue with essential oils, making sure that anything that you're going to put on your skin that's going to absorb through the skin is very, very pure. So we have to make sure, if anything, with essential oils that we're using a very pure product. So there are several companies out there, I'm not going to name any, but I know there are several companies that have very good high quality standards for purity. If you're going to try out essential oils, work with those. Some that I know work nicely, peppermint, particularly for upset stomach. Garlic, we use a form of garlic called Alamax, and we do have it in an oil, like a spray in an oil form. Garlic oil is very, very antimicrobial. So a lot of times we'll use that either topically or in the throat to treat microbial infections. Very effective for that. Oregano oil is also very antimicrobial. Even parasites can be killed by oregano oil. So a lot of different ways you can use oils as well. And depending on how well they go through the skin or where you apply them or how you ingest them. They have different varying uses for that. I really like to use teas when it comes to cold and flus because they're soothing. You can brew them throughout the day and kind of sip on them, as opposed to taking a tablet or taking something that's in a liquid form. And they steep really nicely. So anytime you're steeping something, you're really drawing a lot of the nutrition out of that. Same thing as making a broth, right? You're pulling a lot of the nutrition out into the water, makes it really easy to absorb and to digest. So one of them that I usually go with is called throat coat tea. That's a nice one for soothing a sore throat. Really, really nice for if you've lost your throat or your voice, not your throat. Hopefully you don't do that. Why I wanted to put this one up here because it says lemon echinacea on it. Unfortunately, you can't rely on that echinacea in that tea. Okay, if you want to put echinacea in, use the liquid and add it. I will often advise that. It's very nice, very soothing for the throat. A good way to take echinacea is in a tea, and it actually tastes pretty good. Chamomile tea, people are pretty familiar with the idea of chamomile tea. Chamomile is very soothing, calming, restful. Okay? A lot of times when you're feeling sick, that's what you need. And then for echinacea with the green tea, often I will use it to draw. Okay, so I've had problems with styes in my eye or infections in my eyelashes before, and one sure way to get that to go away or to get that to draw out, to get the pus or whatever it is in there to release from that tiny little hole that's plugged up, is to take a bag of green tea, put some liquid echinacea on it, and then pour as much hot water as you can stand on that, and use it and press it against the eye. It works for a lot of those kind of infections. So if you've got any sort of ingrown hair maybe, or even ingrown nails that are infected, works really, really nicely to pull that out. So I like tea. It's very astringent. It pulls. It's very nice for that kind of stuff. Other home remedies that we will often use. One of Dr. Denbour's favorite is the baked apple. He will use that for anyone who's having digestive upset. What you do is you take an apple. You don't even know if you peel it. Do you peel it? No, don't even have to. And you just wrap it in tin foil. Sometimes he sprinkles a little cinnamon over it, and you bake it and you eat that. Bake it until it's soft. And it's got a lot of really good fiber in there that's awesome, prebiotic, very, very helpful for any sort of digestive upset. So that's a really good one, and it's delicious. Lemon water is very detoxifying, very, very helpful as well. A lot of my patients, when they're getting sick, will drink lemon water for that very reason. Helps to push toxins. Rice water is awesome if you have loose stools or diarrhea, okay, particularly for children. We have a recipe for it, but you're basically boiling the rice and you're drinking the water from the rice, not eating the rice itself. And it really helps to decrease watery stools. Very, very effective for that kind of thing. Apple cider vinegar, not just any apple cider vinegar, but apple cider vinegar with live bacteria, live cultures in it, right? You got to make sure it has the mother in it. That's what they call it. Very, very helpful for, again, digestive issues, digestive upset. And it's very alkalizing. So it makes your body less acidic. Same thing with hot broth. Infections like to make us acidic. We want to be alkaline. We want to be basic. So anything that pushes that direction, very, very helpful for that's why I think chicken soup was so popular for a while. Chicken soup used to be less chicken, more vegetables. And so using that broth, drinking that broth is very, very helpful for fighting off infections or viruses. Ginger is very, very helpful in a tea. They make ginger chews now. Be careful about sugar content of those, obviously. But ginger is very soothing to the stomach. Very, very good for nausea related to intestinal flu. And then a good remedy, I think Dr. Stacy told me about this one, if you have congestion of the lungs particularly, or sinusitis, really wonderful to chop up an onion and put it next to your bed at night, and it really opens up nasal passages, opens up the lungs. It sounds like something your grandmother would tell you to do, but she's not wrong. That works really nicely for lungs, for congestion, very, very helpful for that.
Works in the hot. Works with a hot washcloth on the chest as well.
So you put the onion and then the hot washcloth? Oh, nice. Just to open up everything, all the fumes. Yeah, oh, okay. Yep. Cool. So when we're talking about all of these different things, right? We've got lists and lists of different things you could use. How do you form your natural first aid kit? So what do we want to take away from this for you individually? First, use common sense. If you're coming down with something, get enough sleep, right? Make sure that you're hydrated. Wash your hands, don't touch your face. A lot of those things are very common sense. And so make sure that we're using that, listening to our bodies, taking care of ourselves, especially during this time of year. Becoming educated on what your options are. That's why you're all here. Thank you for being here. Educating yourself, I think, and learning is a key to health. We really believe that at DBC, that education is half of it. And empowering yourself to care for yourself instead of relying on someone else, that's huge. Planning and prevention goes along with that, okay? Making sure that you have healthful options in the home for nutrition, right? Making sure that you have those meals set up. Making sure that you have vegetable broth frozen in the freezer if you need it. Making sure you get enough vitamin D. All of those things go a long way towards protecting your immune system and should be a part of that natural first aid kit. And then resources like tonight, having some echinacea at home, having some essential defense at home so that, hey, I'm coming down with something, it's Friday night, the office is closed, what do I do? Now you know, right? Start taking some of those things. By the time Monday comes around, hopefully you don't even need to call us because you'll be all set. So knowing your resources, having those available, that's really what tonight is all about, making sure that you have those things. And hopefully with prevention plus treatment, you can get those cold and flus right when they start. You don't have to get sick, like Dr. Edmore said. So here are some resources that I used, some research articles that I had. I'd love to take some questions now. If you have questions about any of the things we talked about or about the immune system, let's have a couple minutes of that and then we can go home and go to bed. Is what it feels like. What time is it? 7? Okay. Well, thank you guys for coming out. I appreciate it. Yeah. And this will be on YouTube as well. So if your friends have questions, just direct them to YouTube. What's next time? Do we know?